Silence. Judge Caprio's gavel frozen midair. Tears rolling down weathered cheeks. Your Honor. I never told anyone this story. The courtroom holds its breath. Not even my wife of 52 years. Security cameras capture every trembling word. What happened in that jungle, it broke something inside me. Judge Caprio's voice cracks. Sir, you don't have to. But I do, Your Honor. Because today feels different. What happened next would make millions around the world stop everything they were doing and listen. Some stories are told in courtrooms and the entire world listens. This is the story of how a simple traffic violation became a moment that changed everything anyone thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the wars we fight alone. It was supposed to be case number 47 on a Tuesday morning docket. Routine parking ticket. Elderly defendant. Standard $50 fine. Judge Frank Caprio had handled thousands just like it. He had no idea he was about to hear a story that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The man who walked into Providence Municipal Court that morning looked like any other senior citizen facing a minor infraction. Gray hair, simple clothes, quiet demeanor. His name was Robert Bobby Martinez, age 73. The citation said he'd parked in a handicapped space without proper tags. But Bobby Martinez carried secrets that had been buried for 5 decades. Judge Caprio looked down at the paperwork with his characteristic warmth. Mr. Martinez, I see you're here about a parking violation. Can you tell me what happened? Bobby stepped closer to the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. Your Honor, I parked in that spot because some days I can barely walk. Do you have a handicapped placard, sir? No, Your Honor. I never applied for one. Judge Caprio leaned forward with genuine concern. Why not, if you don't mind me asking? If you have mobility issues, you're certainly entitled to assistance. What Bobby said next would begin to unravel a story that no one in that courtroom was prepared to hear. Because, Your Honor, I spent 50 years convincing everyone, including myself, that I was fine. The judge paused, sensing something deeper in the man's voice. Tell me more about that, Mr. Martinez. Bobby's voice grew quieter. Your Honor, I came back from Vietnam in 1971. Everyone kept asking if I was okay. And I kept saying yes. For 50 years, I kept saying yes. The courtroom, usually filled with background chatter and shuffling papers, had gone completely silent. Court reporter Susan Mitchell later said she'd never seen anything like it in 27 years on the job. But the truth is, Your Honor, I haven't been okay since February 15, 1971. Judge Caprio had no idea that date would be seared into his memory forever. What happened on February 15, Mr. Martinez? Bobby closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength from somewhere deep inside. That was the day my unit got ambushed near Unlock. 12 of us went out on patrol that morning. His voice became barely audible. 3 of us came back. The silence in the courtroom was now absolute. Judge Caprio set down his pen, giving Bobby his complete attention. The thing is, Your Honor, I've been carrying this story alone for half a century. My wife knows I served. She knows I don't like loud noises. She knows I sometimes wake up screaming. But she doesn't know why. Kim's Hina's Bilmi Yorda Ki. Bobby was about to share details that had never been spoken aloud. We were supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. Check for enemy activity near the supply routes. Should have been back by noon. Bobby's hands gripped the podium now, knuckles white. But at 0800 hours, we walked into hell. Judge Caprio found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed. In 34 years on the bench, he'd heard thousands of stories. But something about Bobby's quiet dignity, his trembling voice, was different. The first explosion killed Tommy Rodriguez instantly. He was 19. From Chicago. Carried pictures of his baby daughter everywhere. Tears were now visible in Bobby's eyes, but his voice remained steady. The second explosion got Mike Sullivan and David Chen. Good men. Mike was going to be a teacher when he got home. David was already accepted to medical school. Subscribe now and comment what you think about Bobby's courage to finally share his story, because what happens next will show you what real heroism looks like. What happened to the other 6 men in your unit, Mr. Martinez? Judge Caprio asked gently. That's where it gets complicated, Your Honor. Bobby took a deep breath. We were pinned down for 18 hours. No radio contact. No reinforcements coming. We were on our own. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. By nightfall, it was just 3 of us left. Me, Jimmy Kowalski from Detroit, and a kid from Texas named Billy Morrison. Billy was 18. His birthday was supposed to be the following week. Bobby paused, struggling with the next part. Billy had taken shrapnel to his legs. Couldn't move. Jimmy was hit in the chest, but he was still conscious. And you, Mr. Martinez? Physically, I was okay. Just scratches and bruises. But mentally I was falling apart. But no one could have predicted what Bobby would reveal next. The enemy knew we were there. They were waiting. Playing with us. They could have finished us off any time they wanted, but they were enjoying the hunt. Judge Caprio's expression had completely changed. The routine traffic case had become something else entirely. Around midnight, Billy started calling for his mother. The pain was too much. He was delirious from blood loss. And Jimmy. Jimmy looked at me and said something I'll never forget. Bobby's voice cracked for the first time. He said, Bobby, you're the only one who's gonna make it out of here. You gotta promise me something. The courtroom waited in absolute silence. Promise me you'll tell our families we died fighting. Promise me you'll tell them we were brave. Bobby wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. And I promised him, Your Honor. I looked into Jimmy Kowalski's eyes and I promised. No one in that courtroom was prepared for what happened next. Jimmy died around 0200 hours. Billy lasted until dawn. And when the rescue helicopters finally came at 0800, I was the only one alive. Judge Caprio had stopped taking notes entirely. His full attention was on Bobby, and tears were beginning to form in his own eyes. I kept my promise, Your Honor. I visited every family. I told them their sons died heroes. I told them they fought bravely until the end. I attended every funeral. I looked grieving mothers in the eyes and told them their boys died with honor. Mr. Martinez, that must have been incredibly difficult. That wasn't the hard part, Your Honor. Bobby's voice became barely a whisper. The hard part was what I didn't tell them. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. I didn't tell them that I spent those 18 hours frozen in terror. I didn't tell them that while their sons were bleeding out, I was hiding behind a fallen tree, paralyzed by fear. Judge Caprio felt his heart breaking as the truth finally emerged. I didn't tell them that when the shooting started, I dropped my rifle and ran. I didn't tell them that I found a hiding spot and stayed there while braver men than me fought and died. Bobby looked directly at Judge Caprio now, his eyes filled with 50 years of guilt and shame. I didn't tell them that the only reason I survived wasn't because I was a hero. It was because I was a coward. The impact of those words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Several observers were now openly crying, including court clerk Maria Santos, who later said it was the most powerful moment she'd ever witnessed. But what Judge Caprio said next would change everything. Judge Caprio stood up from his bench, something he rarely did during testimony. Mr. Martinez, may I ask you something? Yes, Your Honor. How old were you when this happened? 19, sir. Just turned 19 3 weeks before deployment. 19 years old, Judge Caprio repeated, his voice filled with emotion. A teenager. In a war zone. Watching his friends die around him. Bobby nodded, unable to speak. Mr. Martinez, do you know what I think? I think you've been carrying a burden that was never yours to carry. What the judge said next would be heard by millions around the world. You call yourself a coward, but let me tell you what I see. I see a 19-year-old boy who was thrown into an impossible situation. I see someone who, despite being terrified, stayed with his dying friends instead of running away completely. Bobby looked up, confused. But Your Honor, I was supposed to fight. I was supposed to save them. Mr. Martinez, you were supposed to be in high school. You were supposed to be worried about homework and dating and what college to attend. Instead, you were in a jungle on the other side of the world, watching people try to kill you. The emotion in Judge Caprio's voice was now unmistakable. And when your friends were dying, you didn't abandon them. You stayed. You comforted them. You held their hands as they died. You made sure they weren't alone. The transformation happening in that courtroom was visible to everyone present. You kept a promise to dying men, Mr. Martinez. You carried their memory with honor for 50 years. You visited their families. You attended their funerals. You made sure they were remembered as heroes. Bobby was crying openly now, but for the first time, they seemed like tears of relief rather than shame. And then, because the guilt was eating you alive, you spent 50 years punishing yourself. 50 years telling yourself you were a failure. 50 years believing you didn't deserve the life your friends never got to live. Judge Caprio stepped out from behind his bench entirely, something court observers had never seen him do. Mr. Martinez, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What happened in that jungle wasn't your fault. The fact that you survived when others didn't wasn't your fault. Fear in the face of death doesn't make you a coward. It makes you human. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media. Judge Caprio walked over to Bobby and did something unprecedented in his courtroom. He hugged him. Mr. Martinez, I'm dismissing all charges against you. More than that, I'm going to personally help you get the handicapped parking permit you should have had years ago. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause, something that had never happened in Providence Municipal Court. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. There's one more thing, Mr. Martinez. I want you to go home today and tell your wife this story. All of it. She's been married to a hero for 52 years, and she deserves to know it. Share this video if you believe our veterans deserve recognition for their service and healing for their wounds, both visible and invisible. Bobby looked up at Judge Caprio with wonder. You really think I'm not a coward, Your Honor? Mr. Martinez, a coward doesn't carry his friends' memories with honor for 50 years. A coward doesn't visit grieving families to offer comfort. A coward doesn't stand in a courtroom and tell the truth about the hardest moments of his life. Judge Caprio's voice was thick with emotion. You're not a coward, sir. You're one of the bravest men I've ever met. The video of this interaction would go viral within hours. Hashtag Judge Caprio and hashtag Bobby Martinez would trend worldwide. The clip would be shared over 50 million times in the first week alone. But the most important audience was sitting in a living room in Providence. That evening, Bobby Martinez sat down with his wife of 52 years, Elena, and for the first time, told her everything. About February 15, 1971. About the jungle. About his friends. About the fear. About the guilt he'd carried for 5 decades. Elena listened without interruption. When he finished, she took his hands and said, Roberto, I've been waiting 52 years for you to trust me with this. I always knew you were carrying something heavy. I just didn't know how to help you put it down. The impact of that courtroom moment spread far beyond Providence. Veterans organizations across the country reached out to Bobby. Therapists specializing in PTSD offered free sessions. Most importantly, other veterans began sharing their own stories of survival and guilt. A Vietnam veteran from California wrote, I thought I was the only one carrying this kind of guilt. Bobby's courage to speak up gave me permission to finally get help. A Marine from Iraq said, "I've been angry at myself for 15 years for coming home when my buddies didn't." Judge Caprio's words to Bobby felt like he was talking to me too. 6 months later, Bobby Martinez returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom. Not for a violation this time, but to thank the judge and share an update. He'd been attending therapy sessions. He'd connected with other veterans. Most importantly, he'd begun to forgive himself. "Your Honor," Bobby said, "I wanted you to know that for the first time in 50 years, I slept through the night last week." Elena said I didn't scream once. Judge Caprio smiled through tears. "How does it feel, Mr. Martinez?" "Like coming home, Your Honor. Like finally coming home." The lesson of that day in courtroom extended far beyond one man's story. Judge Caprio had shown that sometimes the most important thing a person in authority can do is listen. Really listen. Not to judge, but to understand. Not to punish, but to heal. The parking violation that brought Bobby Martinez to court that day was dismissed. But what he found, there was something far more valuable than avoiding a $50 fine. He found forgiveness. He found peace. He found a judge who saw past the surface to the wounded human being beneath. And millions of people around the world found something too. They found hope that healing is possible, even after decades of pain. They found courage to share their own difficult stories. They found proof that compassion can triumph over judgment, understanding over condemnation. Most importantly, they found that sometimes the most powerful words anyone can hear are simply, "It wasn't your fault. You're not alone. And you're braver than you know." Judge Frank Caprio had heard thousands of cases in his decades on the bench. But the day Bobby Martinez walked into his courtroom would be remembered as the day when justice meant more than following the law. It meant seeing the human being behind the case number and offering them what they needed most, not punishment, but understanding. Not judgment, but grace. And in that moment, both men found something they hadn't even known they were looking for: proof that our worst moments don't define us, our healing can inspire others, and the courage to tell our truth can set us free. 3 years later, the impact of that courtroom moment continued to ripple across America. The Bobby Martinez Foundation had been established, providing free counseling services to veterans struggling with survivors' guilt. Judge Caprio served as honorary chairman, using his platform to raise awareness about invisible wounds of war. In Washington, D.C., legislation called the Martinez Act was introduced, expanding mental health resources for veterans and their families. The bill's sponsors cited the viral courtroom video as inspiration for addressing long-ignored issues in veteran care. Dr. Sarah Chen, a PTSD specialist at the VA Medical Center in Providence, reported a 400% increase in veterans seeking help after the video went viral. Bobby's story gave so many people permission to finally ask for help, she explained. They saw that admitting struggle wasn't weakness, it was courage. But perhaps the most profound change occurred in countless individual lives. Maria Santos, the court clerk who witnessed Bobby's testimony, began volunteering at a local veteran center. "That day changed how I see everyone who walks through our courthouse doors," she reflected. "Everyone has a story. Everyone deserves to be heard." Susan Mitchell, the court reporter, started a support group for military spouses. "I realized that Elena Martinez wasn't the only wife carrying her husband's invisible wounds," she said. "Sometimes the families need healing too." Even the security guard who was present that day, retired Army Sergeant James Wilson, found new purpose. "Watching Judge Caprio show such compassion to Bobby made me realize I needed to be more compassionate with myself," he shared. "I'd been carrying my own guilt from Afghanistan. The global response exceeded everyone's expectations. Veterans from Australia wrote about their experiences in Vietnam. British soldiers shared stories from the Falklands. Canadian peacekeepers opened up about missions in Somalia. The universal themes of survival, guilt, and the need for understanding transcended national boundaries. A particularly moving response came from Germany, where a former East German border guard wrote, "I spent 30 years hating myself for following orders." Judge Caprio's words to Bobby helped me understand that being human in impossible circumstances isn't failure, it's survival. In academic circles, the case became a phenomenon. Harvard Law School included the video in their course on judicial empathy. Students analyzed how Judge Caprio transformed a legal proceeding into a healing moment while still maintaining the dignity of the court. Psychology departments across the country used Bobby's story to illustrate concepts of trauma, guilt, and post-traumatic growth. The case study appeared in textbooks and was cited in dozens of research papers. Dr. Michael Torres, a trauma specialist at Johns Hopkins, wrote, "The Caprio-Martinez interaction demonstrates the therapeutic power of being truly seen and heard. Sometimes healing happens not in clinical settings, but in moments of authentic human connection." Media outlets struggled to categorize the phenomenon. CNN's legal analyst called it, "justice with humanity." The Washington Post termed it, "courtroom therapy." Time magazine featured both men on their cover with the headline, "When Justice Means Healing." But perhaps the most accurate description came from Bobby Martinez himself during a follow-up interview. "Judge Caprio didn't just dismiss my case. He dismissed 50 years of shame I'd been carrying. He gave me permission to forgive myself." The ripple effects reached unexpected corners of society. Teachers began incorporating Bobby's story into lessons about courage and vulnerability. School counselors used the video to help students understand that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness. Religious communities found spiritual meaning in the encounter. Pastors preached about redemption and grace. The story transcended religious boundaries while speaking to universal themes of guilt, forgiveness, and renewal. The impact on other judges was equally significant. Judicial conferences across the country began including sessions on trauma-informed practices. Several judges reported that watching the video reminded them why they entered the legal profession in the first place. Bobby Martinez became an inadvertent advocate for veteran mental health. Speaking at VA hospitals and veteran centers across the country, he shared his story with consistent message: "Your pain is real, your struggles are valid, and asking for help is the bravest thing you can do." At Walter Reed Medical Center, Bobby addressed wounded warriors from Iraq and Afghanistan. "I wasted 50 years believing I was weak," he told them. "Don't waste 50 days. Your service matters. Your survival matters. You matter." Elena Martinez found her own voice in the aftermath. She began addressing military spouse groups. "I want other wives and husbands to know that you don't have to carry your spouse's pain alone," she would say. "There's help available, and it's okay to ask for it." The scientific community took notice of the case's implications. Researchers at the National Center for PTSD began studying what they called the Caprio effect, how validation and empathy from authority figures could accelerate healing in trauma survivors. The lasting legacy continued to unfold years later. Judge Caprio remained active in veteran advocacy despite officially retiring. Bobby Martinez, approaching his 80th birthday, continued his advocacy work with renewed energy. The guilt that had consumed 5 decades of his life had been transformed into purpose. The story that began with a simple parking violation had evolved into something much larger. It became proof that healing is possible, that shame can be overcome, and that sometimes the most important thing one human being can do for another is simply to listen with an open heart. In the end, Bobby Martinez and Judge Caprio showed the world that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about understanding. Healing isn't just about forgetting the past, it's about making peace with it. And heroism isn't just about being fearless, it's about finding the strength to be vulnerable, to ask for help, and to help others do the same.